begin, first of all, you don't need an introduction, but Seek and Square Peg says it all. You have had such experiences, probably the most broad experience of anyone in our ecosystem. But I'd really like to begin by going back to the very beginning of your Seek journey, because we're here talking to an audience of early stage founders. And I think I'd really like to go back to your really early days and just recap on how Seek was founded.
Yeah, and the memories are really, really sharp. I mean, it's now 20 years ago. So we started in November 1997. So it'll be 20 years in November. The site went live in March 98. And the original idea sort of came into my head sort of, March 1997, so over 20 years ago now, and there's sort of a bit of a link with Martin Hosking, who I know was here earlier today, and I was a lawyer, and I got a phone call one day from Evan Thornley saying I'm setting up an internet company and I need a lawyer. And that company was Look Smart, and I didn't know what the internet was. I almost literally didn't know what the internet was. So over a 24-month period, which was around the time of the Netscape IPO and the Yahoo IPO, was a pretty exciting time. And that was sort of when I sort of learned a little bit about what was going on and became really, really excited about it. And the idea anyway, I mean, it's not a particularly important story, but I had the idea one day at an auction looking for a house. So the idea originally was a real estate, to do an online real estate site. That would have been a terrible idea. Realestate.com.au is only a $7 billion company. And, but we decided to focus. As I said many times in the past, I mean, having that idea, I thought I was sort of the first person in the world with that idea. I was so excited, but there were a bunch of folks doing it, and I chatted to Andrew, my brother. Andrew's a couple of years older than me, and he was working in management consulting at the time, and over about a 6 or 8 month period, we put together a business plan. He was working incredibly hard with Booz Allen that year. I was working very hard. My wife and I had our second child, our daughter that year. It was an incredibly busy year, and then we got started November. We hooked up with Matt Rockman and his father Irvin, and they were our original investors, and Matt joined us as a co-founder. And then we got started, but very, very vivid memories of that period.
And we've spoken a bit about the importance of the founding team, but talk to me a bit about founding a team with your brother.
Yeah, I mean, it throws up. I mean, we see lots of teams of siblings, life partners, in some cases ex-life partners. I mean, you can't really have ex-siblings, but and so I mean, it throws up it throws up both, compared to a normal founding dynamic, it throws up both additional advantages and additional challenges. And on the whole, it worked incredibly well, but it was really with Andrew and Matt and I, it was more good luck than good management, in the sense that it wasn't like any of us sort of set out and sort of say, look, let's find a team of 3 founders. And we were 3 young men, all basically the same age, so within 21 months of age. None of us had any technology background. We did have, but in terms of the skills and the way we thought about things, it was pretty complementary. But the most important thing, and this was vis-a-vis with Andrew and vis-a-vis as 3 founders generally, we worked out really quickly the importance of giving each other a lot of space. And it was very, between the 3 of us, it was very, very clear about who was responsible for what. And unless decisions were kind of, business-wide decisions around, like, who should we bring in as an investor, if we're in the lucky world we had choice, unless they were business-wide decisions, we all kind of, very much, the 3 of us very much had autonomy to drive our own decisions. But it was also very, very clear, and I think this is a really important point, it was very clear to everyone in the business who people reported to. You didn't have to go to Andrew first, then to me, then to Matt. It was very, very clear around who reported to who and how decisions were made. And that was really important, because otherwise it's incredibly hard and incredibly frustrating for people in the team saying, oh, well, I've got Paul on board, now I'll go and get Matt on board, or Andrew said no. People understood how processes worked, and that was really important.
So interesting that none of you had technology experience. So as a technology company, how did you battle with that in the early days?
Yeah,
Were there any learnings
yeah,
from
and
that?
in fairness, I was probably a bit too literal. I mean, Andrew did have a computer science degree, but he'd then gone on done law and worked in management consulting. And I don't know his technology expertise was was as good as he said it was, but by and large we didn't. He would say it wasn't very good. It was really hard. I mean, it was unquestionably a disadvantage. I think we were, as a business, we were really good, and Andrew sort of led and drove the sort of the strategy side of the business, and a lot of the partnerships in the early on, and sort of the corp dev sort of side of the business. Matt ran the sales side of the business, and I think we were really, really good on sort of the sales and marketing piece, and we're very good in terms of having, really clear in terms of strategic direction and real focus around what we were doing. I think, and this evolved, but I think, and we'll talk probably a little bit about it, we're very good, I think, on the people side and just building a really good team. On the technology and product side, we really struggled. And we really struggled all the way through. All of my 14 years there, we really struggled. I think we started to get a bit of momentum in my last year or two there, and I think as the business has got much, much better. I'm a long way distant from it, I'm not involved. I think the business has got on much better since I've left. I don't know if that's coincidental or not, but it was harder. I mean, businesses can't be good at everything, and there were plenty of things we weren't good at, but technology was a struggle for us.
Very interesting. And you obviously grew very successfully and had, in hindsight, a tremendous trajectory. Do you think the way you grew Seek is relevant to a company that's starting out today?
Look, yes and no. I think we did it in a slightly linear way. And what I mean by that is that we sort of, we did a business plan, then we went off and got funding, then we went and built a site, and at the same time as doing that, we sort of got a team together. So I think you do it in a slightly less linear way today. But I think fundamentally, we did some stuff. What I would say is that we got a lot of things wrong and we got a few things right. The stuff we got right was I think the really important stuff. And there's sort of two things I would say we really, really got right. One was we understood very clearly that there was a large market of employment advertising across originally Australia and New Zealand were focused on as our original markets. It's a large market, and we were convinced it was going to move from print to online, and that the dynamics of marketplace businesses are winner take all or winner take most, and therefore every single decision that we made was focused on how does it maximise the likelihood of us becoming the dominant player in online employment in Australia and in Australia and New Zealand originally, and then the overseas stuff came later. We got that bit right, and I think we got the people piece right, and that was both around culture and around and culture. I'm a big believer that in a business, strategy is a top-down thing and culture's a bottom-up thing. And so if the CEO's out there saying, it's 10:30 in the morning, it's time for everyone to have fun, okay, get up from your desk and have fun, that's not a very real culture. And a lot of that stuff, the fun stuff that's driven the business, that sense of ownership, that sense of passion, I think we played a role, but so many other people played such a critical role, and so many of the great things that happened in our business happened organically that we kind of found out about afterwards. But the fact that people felt that they have the license or permission just to go and do things that were really, central to the culture that was built in the organisation was really important. So they were the two things that we did well, and I think that's, if we were starting a business today, focus and people, they're the things that, I think I'd focus, that hasn't changed.
Yeah. So at some point, you must have realised you made it. We know founders' journeys is hand to mouth, struggling, juggling team, product, sales, culture, investors, etc. Can you pinpoint the point at which you got, my God, we've done it?
Yeah, for me, I can, and that wasn't so much. I mean, I don't think we had any conception the business would grow into the business as it has, and 20 years is a long time, so we had plenty of time to do it. But I don't think we had any conception the business would grow into the business it has. But if you think about our mission, which was to build a market where folks looking for, and bearing in mind outside of things around your education and life partners and stuff like that, I mean, career is one of the most important things in your life. So we were really, really conscious of the fact that not only were we trying to build a business that would be a very profitable business and employ a lot of folks, but we were playing a really, really important role for individuals in terms of the development of their own individual careers. But it's really hard on day one in a marketplace business because folks want to look on the site with the most number of jobs, and the recruitment firms, the employers, etc., want to advertise where the job seekers are. But on day one, you've got no jobs and no job seekers. So how do you kind of build those metrics? And it was probably about 18 months in where suddenly you just felt it was starting to work. We'd had, I wouldn't say critical mass, but we had a really good volume of job seekers. It was building month on month on month. We had a really good volume of advertisers, and again, the number that were churning and having unhappy experiences was starting to really decline. And so that kind of feedback loop suddenly became a lot more positive. And that was the point. Over a 1 or 2 month period, I reckon in about, March, April, May 1999, so it was pretty early in our journey, I sort of felt like this is working. I mean, I don't think we knew what it would become, but it was like, yeah, this feels like it was working. Before that, you're just feeling so insecure for that year and a half beforehand.
That's really, really interesting. And honestly, I thought you might have said a little bit longer than that rather than 18 months in. So.
No, and I don't think we didn't think it would necessarily be an enormous business or anything like that, but you just knew it was working. You just, again, it's something unique about marketplace businesses where, and I mean, just as an aside, I remember about 3 or 4 months in, the first person we placed, was a young woman, and I'd say almost, we obviously don't find out about placements, but this was a real exception. And there was a young woman who was hired by a recruitment firm called Fashion Careers in Sydney, obviously hiring people for the fashion industry, but she was hired as a sort of a PA office manager for the firm itself. And the reason why we know that was like in our first week, and it was in our first week, and she sent us an email saying this is exciting. So the likelihood that someone had been placed before that was pretty damn low. And so we're really excited about it. I remember 3 or 4 months later going up to Sydney, and one of the meetings I had was with Fashion Careers. And I introduced myself to this woman. She was on reception. I had a chat to her. I said, this is so exciting. And you were the first person who got a job through Seek. She said, that's really, really cool. And then I went to meet the guy who ran the firm. It was a pretty small recruitment firm, so we half a dozen people. And the first thing he said to me, he said, this is fucking useless. I'm going to stop advertising with you guys. And I'm like, wait a minute, what about you've already placed someone with us? And he's like, yeah, but that's the only thing that's worked for us, and it's useless and it doesn't work. So that initial period is quite deflating. And so that's a fairly deflating period. It's a hard period. You've got to be really, really resilient. For us, it was a relatively short period, in truth. Yeah. We were very, very, our progress was much more linear than it is for most startups. We were incredibly lucky.
Yeah. So I now wouldn't mind jumping forward to yourself as an investor, and I think the question that I have to ask is, if you could split yourself into 2 people, and you have Paul Bassat of today looking at Paul Bassat of 20 years ago coming through the door, would you have invested in yourself?
Of course. I don't know. Honestly, it's we chatted about this. It was yesterday, or the day before, and I was like, oh, no one's ever asked me that question before, and so I reflected on it a bit after we chatted. The answer is I hope I would have, but we got a lot more no's than yeses from investors when we were looking for capital. We see about 1,500 companies a year, and we invest in about 10 or 12. And so the worst part of our job is that we say no to a lot of people, which is really, really, and I mean that genuinely. It's really, really awful part of our job. And because people have invested so much sort of hopes and dreams and energy and passion into what they do, and every person, like something like this, people will come up after and want to chat, and I'll say, I really just want to catch up and whatever. And we try to catch up with as many people as we possibly can, but it is literally physically impossible to spend as much time as we would love to with every single company and every single entrepreneur. And that's why forums like this are fantastic, because you can talk to a lot of people at once. And there's a long-winded way of saying that. I would say that there are a reasonably, maybe of those companies, there are probably 100 or so, call it thereabouts, maybe a bit more, that are really, really interesting companies that we absolutely could invest in, and it ends up that we only do 10 or 12. Some of it's because we miss out on the opportunity, some of which because the timing's wrong, others we decide not to for one reason or another. And I really hope that I would think that Seek would have been in that bucket. I know there would have been a bunch of questions that we would have had. And it's a good reminder, it's a very good reminder to me about kind of being really, really open-minded when entrepreneurs see us about, you don't have to have everything figured out. Don't feel as though when you approach people like me, you have to have every single answer figured out. It's okay to say, you know what, it's a good question. We spend a lot of time thinking about it, but we don't know the answer yet. This is our tentative answer. I mean, I love hearing that. I mean, as long as it's genuine. I love hearing that from people. It tells me that they're you know, and hopefully we would have felt that it was, hopefully I would have thought it was a really interesting business and written a check on the spot.
I want to come to your portfolio in a second, but one more question on yourself. What advice would you give to yourself today, knowing everything that you know today, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice?
Just go for it. You know, just be really, you know, don't doubt yourself. You know, perhaps don't sweat the small stuff as much. I mean, it is a little bit in the DNA in my case. But don't sweat the small stuff so much. But you know, sort of back yourself in. I mean, I think that came with time, but we perhaps lacked a little bit of self-confidence early on.
As many founders do.
As many founders do. It's a really hard journey, so it's completely understandable. It's completely understandable, and too much self-confidence is a problem as well. But in our case, if I was giving myself advice, it would be perhaps be a little bit more, have a little bit more, you know, belief in ourselves, perhaps.
So you've now got a phenomenal investment portfolio, and
well, we'll see. We'll see in 5 years' time whether it's phenomenal. We think it's great. We're really excited about it, but time will tell. There is only one measure. It's only one measure that counts as an investor, but that's a measure that can take up to 10 or 12 years. But we feel really good about it. But we'll see. We'll see.
Well, I wouldn't mind just exploring a couple of things, one about the business square peg and one about the founder side. On the founder side, what piece of advice would you say to a founder don't do when they come to square peg, and what would you say do when they come?
Don't bring an advisor. I mean it quite genuinely. I mean, it's fine. If you want to use an advisor, that's fine, but don't bring an advisor. And if you bring an advisor, don't let the advisor talk. It drives me mad. When an advisor starts talking about the business, I want to strangle the person. No, I don't mean that. I'm not a violent person. I don't mean that. I don't mean that literally. I'm really sorry to any advisors here, but the advisors don't run the business. Don't put in your deck, you know, valuation comps. You know, you're an entrepreneur, not an investment banker. Let folks like us kind of, you know, form a view on valuation. And if you don't like it, go with someone else who gives, you know, but don't sort of say this is a valuation I'm seeking. Don't put in all the different valuation comps. Don't put in one of those dumb pages that everyone does. One of those dumb pages that has, you know, your company and all your attributes, tick, 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 tick. And then all the other companies, Google, cross, Facebook, useless, crap, pathetic, we're going to smash those guys. Please don't include those charts. Like, you know, you know, I just want to understand, you know, what is the problem? And, you know, you want to meet the people because the deck only tells you so much. So we want to hear the story, really, really keen on hearing how you discover the problem. And if you tell me you were kind of sitting around a room and wanted to start a business and you came up with the best idea you could, that's probably going to be a bit of a turn off as well. So if that's the case, just lie about it. And I'm really not encouraging folks to lie, but I genuinely want to hear about how you solved the problem, how you got to this point. And what's unique and different about what you do. And, you know, so when we're at Seek in our, you know, when we're a few years in, say 4 or 5 years in, and we've built a pretty strong business, and there were competitors emerging all the time. And, you know, the competitors who kind of, and people would send us decks and stuff and say, oh, these guys approached us and whatever. Or you'd see them or you'd meet some of these people. And the people who basically sort of said, oh, the market is X, and Seek sort of become the dominant player, and if we could have 10% of that market, then we could have a business that was Y, and that could still be a fantastic business. We would completely ignore them as a prospective competitor. If on the other hand, they were thinking about the problem differently and said, Seek isn't doing this very well, and there's a real opportunity here, and we're doing it better through, you know, product innovation or business innovation or technology innovation or whatever, then we'd sort of worry about those guys. So what's unique? What's unique and special about what you guys do? What is it that you can do that no one else in the world can do? That's the thing that's sort of most important. So understanding what the problem is, but in particular, we really, really want to spend time with the people and get to know the people, and just listen to them and hear from them. And that's why, I mean, a deck is you know, only so good. You know, we just want to meet the people.
So my last question before I throw it open to the audience questions actually goes to your role as the founder of, co-founder of SquarePeg. You've got some phenomenal backers behind you, Packer and others. How do Talk us through that process and bringing such high quality people into the tent, into an industry that is seen as risky, not necessarily a traditional investment vehicle. How have you managed to create that momentum?
Look, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one is we sort of started life, and we've only been going for just on 5 years, so we're very new. We're very, very new at this, and we're still very much got our L plates on. But we started life as a sort of a vehicle for our own investment. We're really passionate about backing Aussie entrepreneurs and supporting the tech ecosystem and finding world-class entrepreneurs who are doing really exciting things. But it was with our own capital, sort of evolved over time that a group of people backed us. And they were originally people who were very, very close to us. It was like my brother, it was James, who was our chairman at Seek. It was Justin, who's one of my co-founders, his cousin Josh. It was folks that we knew really, really well. And then that sort of evolved from there. But I think there's a real excitement and allure of tech investing. And it is exciting. I mean, when you sit in a meeting and you're hearing about people trying to build a business that is disrupting a major industry or a major company, or changing the world, and usually it's doing it in a really positive way. I mean, the great thing about most of the companies we meet is in one form or another, they're making a really positive contribution to the community. That's really, really exciting. And so people are excited by that. People are excited by that and want to participate in that. And I guess we had an advantage, I guess, being a bit older and being around for a while. There was a bunch of folks that we know, and they were keen to support us, and we're very, very grateful for that.
Well, it's a phenomenal asset you've built for our community, so I think we're all incredibly grateful for the work that you continue to give back.
We're having good fun. Thank you.
I might ask Bronwyn, I have no doubt we have lots of questions coming.
We have a lot of questions, so let's try and get through a few of them. First question is about, Seek obviously was well known for creating a great inclusive culture before it was trendy to do that.
Yeah.
Did you do that consciously?
Yeah, no, very, very, really consciously. I mean, it was, and again, it wasn't because that's going to help us, make money or build a big business, but it's just simply we felt it was the right thing to do, and we were far, far from perfect, and a lot of things we did wrong. But I remember, and I know it would have been the same with Andrew, and I know it was the same with Andrew, and I know it was the same with Matt. But I remember, and I only had one job before as a lawyer, and so often, I reckon once a week, I'd be thinking to myself, oh God, if I ran this place, I just wouldn't do things this way. And so once you've got your own business, you no longer have an excuse to saying, oh, if I ran this place, I wouldn't do it this way. And so you had to remind yourself sometimes. And we never saw having a really inclusive. We never saw a trade-off between having a really inclusive culture or having really, really relatively generous sort of policies or whatever in terms of how we. Whether it was sort of annual leave on a trust and needs basis, or whether it was sort of paid maternity leave, which most companies unfortunately weren't doing at that time, and parental leave and carers leave and all that sort of stuff. And we didn't see that as a trade-off. We actually felt that they really, really contributed to us having a successful business. But the starting point philosophically was, this is, people spend a lot of time at their work and they want to feel as though they're cared for and they're trusted and they're valued, and you want it to be just a fun place to work. And there were a lot of things that we got wrong. We were far from perfect. There are a lot of things I think about now and I just shudder at in the context of the world we live in, 20 years later or 15 years later. It's like, oh gee, that wouldn't, if the world's changed in a really good way. And so there were plenty of things we got wrong, but I think on the whole we did some things really well on the people front.
So related to something you touched on, someone's asked, how has a lawyer helped you doing a startup?
Was that a question asked by a lawyer?
I'm assuming so.
Look, I think that startups come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and so again, it's really important that people don't sort of entrepreneurs come from all sort of backgrounds. So it's important that people don't pigeon themselves. Oh, I'm only a lawyer, or I've only worked in customer support, or I haven't got a software background, etc. But I'm not a particularly disciplined person, and I think in terms of. a few things to help me with, but one was in terms of discipline, and secondly in terms of sort of really being sort of client-focused and client-centric. And when you're a lawyer, particularly if you're working for a big firm or an investment bank or a management consultant, any business where you have a small number of large clients, forces you to be incredibly focused on sort of client needs. And Seek, we actually had, on the whole, a large number of small clients, but I think we took that philosophy, and Matt and Andrew also took that philosophy from what they'd done previously, Matt in the hotel industry, Andrew in management consulting. So there were a bunch of things that helped me in terms of my legal background. I mean, obviously there's some practical stuff. In the same way that any job, there's some practical things that are relevant, but particularly those two areas I think were of real assistance.
Great. So the next question is about maintaining market dominance. You mentioned you were, one of the first players in the scene, and you thought you had the most original idea in the world. But maintaining that sort of, great success you had in the early days, how do you maintain that?
The first thing is, the first thing that's important to remember that doesn't apply to most businesses is, as a marketplace business, it is by and large harder to achieve that position than to maintain that position. That's quite different to a lot of other industries and a lot of other verticals. But marketplace businesses have self-reinforcing nature of market leadership because people, once we'd got to that position, people would come to Seek because it had the most number of jobs, and people would advertise on Seek because we had the most number of job seekers, and you get that virtuous cycle. But you do get threatened by disruptive business models, things like LinkedIn, things like the aggregators Indeed. You've had free models in other countries, all sorts of different sort of threats and stuff like that. But I think part of the thing is that sort of the Andy Grove book, Only the Paranoid Survive. I think there are lots of different traits among entrepreneurs, but I do think that there is a level of insecurity and paranoia that is relatively unhealthy in life, but can be very healthy as an entrepreneur. And I think we had that in spades at times.
So I like our next question. It's about, you mentioned you had little technical skills. So how do you go about engaging people with, CTOs or technicals? I think if I see another posting on an Australian job board about, I have a great idea and I need someone to build it for me, how did you go about engaging people to work with you?
It was really, really hard. Actually, I'm just reading a biography. I don't read many biographies, but just reading, it's sort of more a story about Alibaba, but obviously focuses a lot on Jack Ma, reading at the moment. And I didn't realise, but I sort of vaguely knew that he was an English teacher, but I hadn't joined the dots and realised that he didn't have any technical ability at all. And that was like, oh, that's good. He's built a pretty damn good business. So it can be done, build a technology company without a strong technology background. But I found it very, very hard. A little bit of it was, it took me a while to work out, when I say a while, I'm talking many, many, many years. It took me a while to work out what questions to ask. And I think in businesses, in life, unless you're curing cancer or unless you're sending someone to the moon, most questions we get asked are pretty easy to answer when you think about it. I mean, they lend themselves to an answer. We're not splitting atoms or that sort of thing. The really hard part is working out what questions to ask. That's really, really hard. And I think that was a real limitation for me in the first several years at Seek. I just didn't really know what questions to ask. And sometimes when my radar was up a little bit, I was like, oh, this doesn't sound right. I sort of lacked a bit of self-confidence to challenge it. I was like, oh, who am I to, talking about imposter. I think Kate previously was talking about imposter syndrome. When it came to technology, I definitely felt I suffered from that. I've probably got a little bit more confidence on that now than I did, but that's taken a long, long time.
So maybe an obvious question, but obviously people in the audience would love to know, what is the top piece of advice you have for a young startup in Melbourne in 2017?
But be yourself. I mean, be authentic. Be yourself. I think there are and this is someone who's done different things in their career. I'll say this really openly. I mean, there is nothing more exciting in the world. There is nothing more exciting in the world than starting a company and building a company. And those first few years were just they're just unbelievably exciting. You've got to have a very, very high level of energy. And I still think I've got pretty good energy, but I don't have the energy I had 20 years ago. And so I've got a lot more experience than I had then, but I've got maybe not a lot less, but I've got less energy. And energy is much more important, I think, in a startup than experience. I know people think experience is everything, but energy and passion and drive. And I think you've got to ask yourself the question. It is a really wild ride. It is full of ambiguity. It's full of, have you got the resilience and the energy and the passion and the drive? are you doing something really special? And this probably is now 3 or 4 pieces of advice. Are you doing something really, really special? I mean, be honest with startups. Startups are so hard and so many things can go wrong and they're so full of risk and the odds are so weighed against you. If you're going to take that insane, crazy level of risk, like solve an important problem, like solve a big problem. Don't do something uninteresting and boring. I don't mean, like sometimes we love what we call boring businesses, things that no one else thinks about doing because they're kind of, you need to really understand industry. So I don't mean boring in a pejorative way. What I mean by that is like, don't just copy what 20 other people are doing. Like if you want to do something really different and unique and special. Really push yourself and really challenge yourself as to what is it about what you're doing is special and unique compared to what other folks are doing.
So next question is, as an investor, what are the areas that are emerging that are exciting you in technology right now?
Oh, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, I think the thing that will change the world, and it's very hard. Not quite sure how we, as an investor, how you play to this theme. I couldn't think of a better term, but how you play to this theme. But I don't think there's any question that AI is going to be the thing that changes the world most in the next 20 years. When I say that, in terms of our universe, so alternative energy is going to be incredibly important. It's not an area that we know a lot about. What's happening in life sciences in a whole range of different areas. Immunotherapy and cancer in cancer has been unbelievably exciting, but they're not areas that we know a lot about. But in terms of our world, AI is, I think is going to have an impact on the world over the next 20 or 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, that is so much more profound than anything we've seen in the last 50 or 60 years as we went from the the mainframe era to the PC era to the internet era to the mobile internet era. Those things have been quite transformative technologies, but I think what's happening with AI, and it's going to take quite a while to play out. It's been around for 60 years or so, is really, really exciting.
So I don't know if you've ever got this next question before, but I'm going to throw it to you anyway. Which superhero are you?
No, I've never got that question. I was never really a big superhero kid. I mean, just Wonder Woman's pretty cool at the moment, so I'll go with Wonder Woman.
Last question that's come through, and I actually don't know if this is a good thing, but how do you build a monopoly? But I guess my question is that a good thing to set out to do?
Actually, I don't know if people, I talked about this the other day, actually. I don't know if people have read Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1, which is a really, I mean, he's a bit of a crazy guy, but it's a fascinating book. But he kind of justifies monopolies and distinguishes between good monopolies and bad monopolies. I mean, Seek never had a monopoly, and there's also part of it, comes back to the question that Kate asked me earlier about, about DEX and what not to do as founders and stuff like that. People often define their business very, very narrowly because it suits them. So, like, we're the only business, we're the only business in Collingwood with a brother and sister founder, both in their 20s, who wear striped socks, and that's their sort of point of difference. And so we defined our competitors really, really broadly at Seek, and I think everyone should do that because people define their competitor as a competitor's solving the same problem as you are in the same way as you are. That's not a competitor. A competitor is someone who's solving the same problem as you. And so Seek never had a monopoly. I mean, maybe and it's an amazing, something I think we're really long gone, but I think we were very, very proud of it. Maybe 30% of Australians found their jobs through Seek, which is amazing, and maybe the next most significant individual method of getting a job was 1 or 2%, something like LinkedIn or whatever. But 70% of Australians found their jobs other ways, through word of mouth, through networks, through a sticker posted on a shop, etc., a little notice on a shop, etc., etc. So we never had a monopoly, but obviously we felt really passionate about the fact that A, we were helping a lot of Australians find jobs, and B, compared to the incumbent ways of doing it, it was much cheaper, much quicker, much more efficient for the folks looking for staff than had been done previously. And so we felt really good about that and never felt any sense of, embarrassment about having a monopoly, mainly because we didn't have one.
Great, so we've just got one last, actually they keep coming, but I'll do one more. Can you explain how the decision-making process works at Seek? I guess that's interesting for people who are running larger companies. Is it unanimous?
At Square Peg, you mean?
Yeah, a Square Peg. It was specifically about Seek. But
yeah. No, I mean, I'd prefer, because the decision-making process at Seek really quickly, but Square Peg's probably more interesting, I think. But Seek was really clear. I mean, the decision-making rights rested with the individual. So, you know, one good example was, I used to get very, very involved in hiring until we IPO'd, so that was 7 years into the journey, and just function of time it became impossible. But until we IPO'd, I interviewed every single person who started at Seek. And it was a great way of getting to know people, but I was involved in the interview process for literally every person we'd hired, and obviously a lot of people that we didn't end up hiring. And unless that person was reporting to me, it wasn't my decision. So I would frequently say to whoever the hirer was, let's say it was our marketing director, I'd say to Katie, I'd tell her what I thought. I'd say, oh, yeah, I thought that person was amazing, or no, I wouldn't have hired it for those reasons. But you know, she was responsible for the outcomes in her team, and therefore the decision around who she would hire was her decision, not my decision. And that, by and large, was the way it worked there. And you know, again, I don't know how it's worked the last 6 years, but you know, individuals were very much empowered to make the decisions that you know, that were part of their responsibility. Obviously, you make some things collaboratively where they're much more cross-functional, affect the whole business. Square Peg, we've actually, I mean, I think we've spent a lot of time discussing and debating this. And we used to have a requirement. There's 8 partners. We used to have a process that had to have two-thirds vote in favour of an investment, which actually, you know, the maths works out as 3/4, not 2/3, given there's 8 of us, so you'd need 6 out of 8. And what was happening in truth is that I think too often, too many of us were voting yes for things because we're kind of like, if we don't vote yes, it won't happen, or I know this person's, you know, person X is really passionate about this deal and I want to support them and back them. We've actually changed that requirement, but conversely for the purpose of actually raising what we think we've raised the bar. So, and it's a bit counterintuitive. We've gone from 6 yes votes to 4 yes votes. So only 4 out of the 8 have to vote yes. We vote on everything. We vote privately. We sort of send it in a Slack channel to the person who's counting the votes, and then after the vote, so no one knows how everyone else has voted until after the vote, and then it's very transparent. But we don't want anyone, you don't want people influenced by other votes, and you only need 4 yes votes, but you can only vote yes if you're a strong yes. So if you're not a strong yes on a deal, so we want, you know, when we want to have, we would much prefer have 3 or 4 people who are really passionate about a deal than 6 people saying, oh yeah, this sounds good, let's do it. So that's how our decision-making process works at Square Peg. No doubt we'll iterate it again over the next. So you only have to, if you want us to invest in you guys, you only have to get to 4 of us. Makes it a little bit easier, but everyone on the team will obviously meet the entrepreneurs, but only 4 people need to vote in favour.
Well, thanks, Paul, for having a great discussion, and join me in thanking Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Real pleasure to meet you.